So welcome back, everyone. It has truly been a day full of thought-provoking discussions, inspiring ideas, and meaningful exchanges. We are delighted to now begin our final panel of the day on African creativity in shaping a sustainable tomorrow. Pour animer cette discussion, j'ai le plaisir de vous présenter notre modératrice, Charlotte Jess Bento. Formée en histoire contemporaine à la Sorbonne et en relations internationales à l'Institut, elle a mené une carrière au sein des Nations Unies et d'institutions de financement du développement, notamment le Fonds mondial. Avec plus de 20 ans d'expérience en diplomatie et en développement, elle se consacre aujourd'hui à la diplomatie culturelle et à la promotion d'artistes contemporains d'Afrique et de la diaspora. Convaincue du rôle essentiel des industries créatives dans le développement économique et les stratégies d'influence des États, ainsi que du potentiel des artistes contemporains à renouveler les récits sur le Sud, elle a fondé This Is Your Heart, une structure de conseil indépendante dédiée à la diplomatie culturelle. Elle sera accompagnée aujourd'hui de Banso Sigam, Philbert Tologo et Nelly Wanji. Donnons-leur un très bon accueil.
Thank you very much and welcome everyone. I think we have to switch to English, right?
Yes.
I was surprised you made the introductions in French, but that's great. Francophonie is also supporting this event, so we have to also speak French. So welcome everyone and thank you for the nice introduction. Indeed, I'm an alumni of 2001, so 25 years back. It doesn't make me very young, but that's how it is. At the Graduate Institute, and I studied history of international relations and development. So I'm very, very happy to be here, and especially on a subject that I think is very important, and it's about really the narratives and how the arts and culture sector is really shaping the narratives about Africa and the role of the creatives on the continent. And I'm here today accompanied by three fascinating experts / artists. So that's first starting from the extremity, Dr. Bansoa Sigam, who is a Swiss Cameroonian curator and researcher with a double PhD from Geneva and Berlin University in art history and social science and museology. Her curatorial practice is at the intersection of these disciplines, and she leads occasionally projects with the Museum of Ethnography in Geneva and also founded the Nuola Cultural Studio. Welcome, Bansoa. Then we have Philibert Togo, who is, I would say, the only artist on this panel. So we'll be very happy to hear very deep comments and to hear his experience as an artist. He's a contemporary dancer and choreographer who arrived to Switzerland in 2006. He's originally from Burkina Faso and still works with young dancers in Burkina every year. So he's very involved on the continent. And last but not least, Nelly Wanji, who is based in Lausanne but travels the continent very often. She comes from the world of international luxury. She's passionate about the contemporary craftsmanship from the continent. And now lead Moonlook, which is an innovation consultancy dedicated to promoting and developing African heritage and strengthening the brands on the continent, supporting the cultural entrepreneurs. So welcome all of you. And I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your insights. First, allow me to give a short introduction about the subject. I was asked by the organizers to sort of set the scene. And I've prepared also a couple of visuals because when we talk about the narratives and the artists, it's always good to look at the artworks and to get inspired and see what we mean by narratives in motion. So congratulations to the organizers for this title, which I find quite interesting because indeed the narratives are in movement. We can see lots of movement and of course, what's happening in the artistic and cultural context in Africa is not disconnected from the social, economic, and political context on the continent. Obviously, the geopolitical landscape is shifting quite fast, and Africa is definitely no longer peripheral from a number of perspectives, of course, on global governance with an increasing role, obviously, at the G20, that we could see with the South Africa G20 presidency last year, but also, of course, the relevance of the African continent by its own geography, its own demography, and also richness in critical minerals. So obviously, Africa is at the center of lots of geopolitical dynamic and very high on the global political agenda. So similarly, we can see that the artistic and cultural sector is definitely rising on the continent and has emerged as a soft power, if you wish, for a growing number of African countries who are increasingly investing in this area. And I'd just like to mention a few examples. For example, you know, the Venice Biennale, which is a very key moment for contemporary art. And it's happening starting in May in Venice. And this year we have 12 national pavilions of African countries, with 4 African countries inaugurating their first pavilion, which is quite interesting. And this is Guinea, Equatorial Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Somalia. So just to show, you know, how active and proactive these countries are being on cultural diplomacy. And of course, that will be the first time that this biennale is curated by an African woman, the late Koyo Kuo. Unfortunately, she passed away in a very tragic way last year. But we will see, obviously, with this edition of the Venice Biennale, lots of artists from the African continent and the diaspora also really shaping the global art discourse of contemporary art in particular. And just looking at our own Switzerland at the moment, for those who might not be aware, from next week there will be 2 major exhibitions, one in Lausanne at the Musée Cantonal des Beaux-Arts of the Nigerian artist Otto Kanga, who was previously at the Museum of Modern Art in Paris with the same exhibition. And I really encourage you to go and discover this exhibition, a major rising artist. And also the leading exhibition of Kerry James Marshall at the Kunsthaus in Zurich, African-American painter, one of the most important of his generation. So just to say that there are many things happening, and African artists are now have reached full recognition. So I just prepared a couple of images because I wanted to show how the visual artists are actually rewriting those narratives about Africa, and first and foremost, sort of questioning who has been telling their stories so far. And that's an artist from Congo, Sherry Samba, and his real map of the world, where, of course, he's questioning the cartography that we all use, where Europe is at the center. But in this case, he's himself at the center of the map, and obviously, you know, questioning about the space of Africa and African artists in the way we are looking at the world. So I will pass very quickly, but it's just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we mean by visual artists shaping these narratives about the continent. And this is a very famous artist from South Africa, William Kentridge, who has this famous work called The Invention of Africa, which is written on the actually on the natural history book about Brazil. And so he's sort of deconstructing the myth of Africa and the sort of fantasy that the colonial period has been building about the continent. This is Kilwanji Kiahenda, who is an artist from Angola, He's on his side also, of course, criticizing and deconstructing the stereotypes he inherited from the colonial times about the safaris and the darkness of Africa and all of these narratives. But of course, behind the subtext is about political violence in these countries, which does not transpire from this image, but which is really the commentary that he's trying to make. And here is a woman artist from Madagascar, and she's working with the ancient cartography, the sort of pre-colonial cartography of Africa. As you can see, the iconography about the woman and African woman. So she's really reflecting on the construction also of the iconography around the continent and how we can redraw and sort of reframe these narratives today. Here we have another artist, British Nigerian, Yinka Shonibare. This is a scramble for Africa. This is the representation of the Conference of Berlin when the European powers sort of divided between themselves the continent. And as you can see, he speaks about cultural hybridity. We have all these characters wearing the typical African textile, which is the wax, but in a very Victorian style of that time. And also, obviously, there are different stories about this fabric that would have been brought by the Dutch to Africa from Indonesia, and which is now a huge symbol of Africanity. So there is, of course, a commentary around this cultural hybridity and what is truly African. We also have a generation now of artists, of course, working around Black subjectivity and reversing the colonial gaze. This is an artist from Benin, Romeo Mivekanin, that maybe you would have seen in a gallery in the Old Town. He was presenting his work a couple of months ago, which is quite fascinating. He's basically using the historical painting codes of Europe and self-portrayting himself in the middle, really looking at the viewer. So basically, the Black subject is no longer peripheral in the art history, but it's really at the center, sort of questioning those looking at them. And this is the African-American, very important painter, Kerry James Marshall, who is showing in Zurich at the moment. And that's an interesting piece because it's depicting his own artist studio and actually commenting on the fact that now a generation of artists of African heritage are expanding the possibilities of representation, because in the art history, Black people were not represented most of the time, or represented as slaves or domestic servants and so on, having a very minor role. And so that's really sort of reversing this trend and fully including the African artist at the center of art history. This is another piece from Kerry James Marshall, and very linked to that, this is an installation with jute sacks from a Ghanaian artist, Ibrahim Mahama, who is also a major artist at the moment. And that's the installation he made at the Kunsthalle in Bern last year. So again, in Switzerland, and recovering with all these sacks, the Museum of Art sort of reclaiming the past and present narratives around the role of African artists in art history. So that's also quite symbolic and important. Maybe I will pass quicker, but just to say, the artists are developing new cultural narratives and sort of, different versions of what we call modernity, or what we could call modernity, and new identities. It's sometimes linked to Afrofeminism. And this is an artist from Côte d'Ivoire, making hair sculpture with her own hair, which is obviously also a very dear symbol of Africanity. That's an art activist from South Africa, very well known, Zanele Muholi, who is really talking about the LGBT communities in South Africa and sort of expanding also the gays. Mary Sibande, also from South Africa. And that's maybe an artist you've seen before from Zimbabwe, who is sort of reusing the material, the waste in the computer keys from the phones and from the computers and so on to make this beautiful tapestry. And that's really around, talking about Africa in a globalized world with, of course, deep consciousness of the environmental issues. And I'm finishing on this, which is from a French Senegalese artist, Alexis Peskin, who is also, talking in a way of Afrofuturism, but also the new frontier for entrepreneurship and the creativity really of the continent, but of course, referring also about all these the street sellers in the streets of the Western capitals, and showing that actually behind it sort of cliche and stereotypes, you have a very creative continent and with creative entrepreneurship that is extremely vivid. So, I mean, just this to say, and that was a very quick overview, but to sort of, really set the scene about these changing narratives and narrative emotions and how the visual artists are really playing their role into this. One last point before inviting my co-speakers to intervene that I would like to make is that obviously artists are doing their part. But also Africa's governments and institutions are also making deliberate investments in culture and in the artistic and cultural ecosystems. And we were actually talking among us just before this panel discussion that, of course, there are a couple of countries being at the forefront of that movement. Morocco, Benin, Nigeria, establishing new museums and new contemporary art museums and ecosystems, but also, stimulating the creative industries. And I think we're going to hear about this, especially through the experience and insights of Nelly later. But obviously, this is quite important to look at what's the government vision and sort of the impetus of developing the creative economy as a strategy for countries. So I'll stop there and invite first, I'm not sure how we are with time. Can I still invite maybe Bansoa to intervene and then turn to Philibert or...
One question, yeah, if that works, or
maybe, well, let's turn, but then I will switch to French because we would like to start then with Philibert Tologo, who is a contemporary dancer and choreographer based here in Geneva, but also very active in his home country, Burkina Faso, with the younger generation of dancers. Je vais parler en français maintenant. Et je vais remercier notre collègue pour faire la traduction simultanée. Et je pense qu'on est ravis de t'accueillir, Philibert, le seul artiste de ce panel, même si nous sommes tous très impliqués auprès des artistes. Et laisse-moi reprendre les questions que je pensais te poser. Voilà, peut-être en nous parlant de ton parcours comme danseur, si tu pouvais nous partager ton expérience de ton arrivée en Suisse à travers la danse, ta pratique de la danse contemporaine, et comment tu peux témoigner de l'évolution des récits et des langages esthétiques à travers la danse, à la fois sur le continent, mais aussi ici en Suisse comme un danseur établi ici. Ah, peut-être on va laisser juste traduire la question, si ça marche.
Can you hear me? Yes, so I'll just translate. So we're glad to invite you here, Philibert Togolo, as the only artist on this panel. And the question revolves around your experience and your arrival in Switzerland through dance, and how that also impacts the narratives that is done on the continent and also here in Switzerland.
Merci Charlotte et bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je voudrais d'abord dire un grand merci à mes pères fondateurs de l'Afrique. Vous savez qu'il y a quelques jours, le Ghana vient de gagner un combat historique. Et donc, je fais partie de cette famille des Africains qui sont en train de faire un travail pour éveiller les consciences à travers le mouvement. Et donc, je dirais que bravo à nos pères fondateurs qui ont cru à cette vision de défendre l'Afrique. Avant tout, je voudrais tout d'abord dire que je suis danseur africain avant d'être un danseur contemporain. Je rends hommage à tous les pays d'Afrique de l'Ouest parce que je ne connais pas toute l'Afrique. Avant ça, je suis allé au Bénin me former en danse béninoise. Il y a un moment, notre chorégraphe nous a menés dans une famille où il y avait les masques. J'ai oublié les noms de ces masques-là. Et pour moi, c'était la révélation de la puissance de la culture africaine. Et dans cette famille, pour nous réunir, pour nous initier, il y avait un vieux sage qui nous chantait une chanson, qui ça m'a resté. Pour nous motiver dans la création, il disait « Bouquet bounade, bouquet bounade, bou, bou ». Nous, on devait répondre « bou, bou » pour dire que nous sommes dans une famille dans laquelle on doit apprendre la culture. Est-ce que je continue ou je laisse traduire un peu?
I will try to translate quickly. So, Philibert was thanking our founding fathers in Africa as he mentioned the battle won by Ghana in front of the United Nations General Assembly, and that he feels that he is also part of these people and these Africans who played a role in this movement, and he would like to thank the path laid forward by the founding fathers and likes to continue this path forward. He then mentioned that he is before and foremost an African dancer before becoming being a modern dancer, and then he discussed his experience of going to Benin, where he after leaving Burkina Faso, where he got to see the dances with the masks and talking about the whole culture there and how he saw this showed the power and the culture of Africa. And then he mentioned the apartments and the belief that an elder told him that he was part of a family and that this family should work together.
Alors, pour répondre à ta question par rapport à mon arrivée en Suisse en tant que danseur traditionnel d'abord, j'ai appris les danses traditionnelles de Burkina Faso. Au Burkina Faso regorge plus de 67 à 70 ethnies différentes. Alors moi, je suis de côté de Bobo-Dioulasso, la deuxième capitale qu'on appelle la ville culturelle de Bobo, parce que le Bobo-Dioulasso fait partie en fait, est très proche de deux pays, la Côte d'Ivoire et le Mali. Et donc, ça fait qu'il y a une influence culturelle à Bobo. Et on va dire que presque tous les grands artistes, l'un des grands artistes sont venus de Bobo parce que voilà, il y a une belle culture, une influence culturelle. Et à partir de cette connaissance culturelle traditionnelle de Burkina Faso, j'ai eu la chance d'abord de voyager en Afrique en tant que danseur, dont je disais tout à l'heure avec un chorégraphe béninois qui s'appelle Kofi Koko. Et je suis allé en Afrique du Sud aussi apprendre quelques pas de danse zoulou. Je suis allé au Brésil parce que avant d'être danseur, j'étais un acrobate. Et je voulais apprendre l'influence, la danse capoeira. Je suis allé au Brésil apprendre quelques notions de la danse brésilienne parce que l'influence venait de l'Afrique. Et ensuite, je me suis retrouvé en 2005 à Genève en tant que danseur, bien sûr, avec mes bagages africains. je dirais que j'ai eu la chance d'arriver en Suisse, à Genève, comme un danseur africain qui n'est pas né ici à Genève, qui a été bien accueilli. Mais pour dire que j'ai été bien accueilli parce que j'amenais une nouvelle démarche qui n'était pas forcément vue à Genève. C'est-à-dire un danseur traditionnel qui amène un bagage de ses influences, qui proposait une forme artistique nouvelle. Donc en 2005, j'ai été accueilli à Genève comme un artiste vraiment qui était né ici. Pour moi, ça a ouvert la porte de mon installation en Suisse. À partir de 2005, j'ai enchaîné des créations, des rencontres. Mais pour dire que dans cette évolution artistique, bien sûr, je vous ai parlé de l'historique par rapport à ce que Ghana vient de faire. On a ce poids qui nous suit par rapport aux difficultés, par rapport aux regards. Quelles sont des visions qu'on impose à un artiste ici? Parce que soit tu rentres dans le cadre, soit tu rentres pas dans le cadre. Ça, c'était le défi constant pour moi ici en Suisse. Je m'arrête là peut-être. Je ne sais pas si j'ai répondu à la question, mais c'est
Merci
une...
beaucoup. Yes, so I'll keep translating. He then talked that before coming to Switzerland, there was a long travel around Africa. First of all, I mean, in his tradition in Burkina Faso, in Bobo-Dioulasso, where he's from, a city that is close to two other countries, namely Ivory Coast, where he got to learn a lot of traditional dances, and that played a role in the dances that he then in the way that he now does dance. Then he got the chance to travel around Africa, namely he went to Benin, but also other countries in West Africa, and also in South Africa, where he learns Zulu dances. And following this, he went across the Atlantic to Brazil to learn capoeira. He talks how he is formerly an acrobat before being a dancer, but he wanted to learn capoeira because of the influence that this dance and this art has from African heritage. Then he came to Geneva in 2005 with the African baggage, but also the one he learned in Brazil. And he talks about the chance that he had to be very well received here as he brought this new wave, but also this new way of dancing, which definitely played a role in how he was received here in Switzerland, and that he was welcome for an artist who he is. However, he talked about how this opened a lot of doors and he got to meet a lot of people in the industry. However, he does talk also about the point that the weight comes with the looks that people give, specifically because of his origin, and that sometimes it's a question of whether you fit the mold or you don't fit the mold, and when you don't fit the mold, the looks are different.
Je continue? Alors, pour être un artiste créateur en Europe, il y a double défi. Le premier défi, c'est l'intégration. Et le deuxième défi, c'est de garder ses racines. Comment tu fais pour garder tes racines en habitant dans un pays qui t'accueille? Alors, c'est la difficulté pour beaucoup d'artistes aujourd'hui. Deux fois, je suis vu comme un artiste engagé parce que je refuse d'enterrer ma tradition. Je parle toujours de ma tradition à travers mes créations. Par exemple, en 2005, ma première création s'appelait Kouman. Kouman, ça veut dire la parole. Moi, je suis parti dans une notion africaine que toute la culture, toute l'éducation, la transmission passe par la parole chez nous, peut-être même mondialement. Alors, j'ai décidé de créer ma première création à Genève, intitulée Kouman, pour pouvoir transmettre. Au fil des années, j'ai vu mes projets refusés parce que je partais toujours de ma tradition pour créer une œuvre contemporaine. Et là, c'est le défi que moi, artiste, je rencontre. Et je vois aussi ce défi-là chez beaucoup d'artistes. Et ma chance dans cette vision, c'est que je suis enseignant, je suis chorégraphe et j'arrive à organiser des événements culturels. Donc j'ai différentes possibilités d'être actif dans mes créations. Mais je dirais aussi que depuis quelques années, je parle des difficultés, mais depuis quelques années, j'ai constaté qu'il y a une ouverture de plus en plus aux Africains ou aux créateurs africains. Que ce soit les compagnies de musique, les compagnies de danse, arts plastiques, les comédiens, il y a une ouverture on remarquait une ouverture depuis quelques années. De mon point de vue, je dirais que cette influence vient d'où? Ça vient de vous. De vous dans le sens que quand je suis arrivé en 2005, il n'y avait pas d'Africains à Genève qui étaient dans le spectacle. Mais j'ai vu des jeunes qui sont nés ici, Africains, métis, mélangés. Au fil des années, j'ai vu ces enfants-là qui sont imposés, par exemple, dans la danse urbaine. À partir de ces danses urbaines-là, je vois des jeunes qui sont programmés aujourd'hui dans les grands théâtres dans lesquels moi j'ai dansé. Donc, je dirais que c'est grâce à vous, quand je vois des jeunes dans la salle, c'est grâce à votre vision aussi de soutenir les créations africaines, les artistes africains, l'œuvre contemporaine, je vais dire, contemporaine, quelque part.
Yes. So, following on what he said before, to be an artist in Europe, there are two challenges. The first one is integration, and the other one is how do you keep connected to the roots of the country, of your country, when you're in a different country that welcomes you. Sometimes he is seen as an engaged artist, and he wants to be seen as an engaged artist who doesn't want to bury his roots and tradition, and he puts them in the way he works. In 2005, when he arrived in Switzerland, that's where his first piece was Kuman, which means orality. That means, and that for him, orality is everything that goes with who we are as people from the continent, and that he wishes this to pass on. He saw then in his career in Switzerland, a lot of projects refused because he wanted to talk about these traditional roots that he had in a modern way. And that these are obstacles that he sees for a lot of artists here in Switzerland. Then he thanks the fact that he's also a teacher and a choreograph, which means that he also has kind of chances and opportunity to have these projects still being brought forward. And that in the last years, he sees that there's more and more openings for Africans and African shows and traditions, whether it is in companies, in plastics, arts, or in comedy. And he believes this comes from you here, from people that since he arrived in 2005, he's seen a lot more mixed race or people who are born from African parents, and who also open up new doors and impose themselves, whether it's urban dances or any other field from the continent. And he thanks the youth for events like this to bring these points forward.
Merci beaucoup, Philibert. C'est vraiment un témoignage que je trouve très, très sensible. Je voudrais juste te poser une question de suivi et par rapport à ta contribution au Burkina. Donc, plusieurs mois par an, tu retournes au Burkina pour former des jeunes danseurs, pour en tout cas transmettre, parce que tu es vraiment quelqu'un qui est vraiment dans la transmission, je pense qu'on l'a bien compris. Et je voudrais que tu nous parles justement sur la création justement sur le continent dans la jeune génération. En fait, quels opportunités, quels défis tu vois dans le travail que tu fais avec les jeunes de création, quel est leur état d'esprit, quelle est leur vision, voilà, que tu nous parles d'eux.
Merci. Alors,
attends, il va juste traduire la question.
So a follow-up question. It's about Burkina Faso. We know that you go back a lot and often, and that you teach youth there, and we understand that you're very much in passing on knowledge. So please tell us more about how does this impact the creation in the continent for youth, and what are the challenges, and what are the spirits, and what is the mindset of the youth on the continent? So please tell us more about this.
Alors, pour répondre à ta question par rapport à mon engagement à la transmission, pour moi, c'est très important de redonner ce que mes formateurs m'ont donné, de redonner à l'Afrique ce que l'Afrique m'a donné en termes de connaissances culturelles. J'ai gardé un lien très fort de mon pays, Burkina Faso, car je fais partie des danseurs qui ont cru à la danse. C'est-à-dire, moi, je suis un autodidacte. Autodidacte, ça veut dire que quelqu'un qui n'a pas fait des études et qui s'est consacré à sa culture, qui s'est consacré à sa pratique culturelle. C'est à partir de là où je suis parti en Europe. Mais je me dis, il y a d'autres qui sont derrière moi, qui n'ont pas forcément cette vision de transmettre, de créer, de former, de structurer. Donc pour moi, c'est très important de repartir au pays, non seulement aller me ressourcer, mais de partager mon expérience que j'apprends ici en Suisse et de donner confiance à ces jeunes-là ils sont des relais. Ils sont la relève de la culture burkinabé. Pour moi aussi, c'est très important de ne pas montrer que je suis un danseur qui fait partie des classes d'élite. Pour moi, il n'y a pas de culture de place élite. Si tu es artiste, tu contribues soit je dirais, à l'éveil conscience d'importance culturelle, soit tu contribues à la formation ou tu contribues à l'économie. Dans le sens que tu crées des projets, tu crées des projets et tu emploies des danseurs, des musiciens, des décorateurs, etc., etc. Pour moi, tout ça fait partie je dirais, de la transmission. J'ai fait des projets, notamment à Bobo Dioulasso. J'ai regroupé plus de 20 danseurs. J'ai financé de mon propre moyen pour dire que si je ne fais pas, je ne donne pas des exemples, on sera toujours obligé de passer par les instituts européens, c'est-à-dire le Centre culturel français à l'époque, aujourd'hui on l'appelle l'Institut français. Et ça freine notre évolution culturelle parce que on n'a pas les moyens de créer des structures nous-mêmes. Et je pense que je vais dire, c'est que quand tu n'as pas de moyens, tu n'as pas de structure, ça bloque complètement l'évolution culturelle et ta vision culturelle. Donc pour moi, c'est important de repartir au pays, partager mon expérience, sans me mettre au-dessus des autres. Même si j'ai eu la chance de venir en Suisse, travailler en Suisse, pour moi, le retour est très, très, très important.
I will continue. And so the question about why is it important to go back? For him, it's important to go back because he wants to give back to those, notably the teachers and those he has learned from, but also to give back to Africa, the continent that has so much knowledge to learn from, but also to share to others. He's from these people in Burkina Faso who believes in dances and that he learned everything himself and that he had to go through the challenge of learning everything himself. And that that's what gave him the passion for dance, but that he knows that other people are not necessarily all like this. That they don't have maybe the vision to create or to transform, and he wants to give back. So he goes to share what he has learned here in Europe, in Switzerland, but also to learn more for himself, to resource himself, to know more about the Burkinabese culture. And for these young who are the future of Burkina Faso, that they will have to take on the next challenges of the country and of the continent. He also does not want to be seen as an elite, that you have to contribute, you have to help formation, you have to help the culture ties, you have to help economy in the country, and you have to create projects, you have to employ people, and part of transmitting that is to transmit knowledge. That he needs to know that he wants to show the good example, and that if he doesn't, then we always have to go through institutions, and the problem of institutions comes with fundings, and that he needs, and the funding sometimes can slow the progress. So if you don't have the mean, you don't have the structure, and that is why it is very important for him to show his experience back home in Burkina Faso.
Merci beaucoup, Philibert. Merci beaucoup, traducteur. Thank you so much.
Je vous laisse.
Merci beaucoup.
Thanks. Merci pour ton partage, Philibert. And now I will switch back to English and move to a different set of disciplines. I'm going to go on the reverse and call Nelly Wanji next to share her experience. Nelly, you're working with talents and cultural entrepreneurs in Africa in different countries, in particular in the sector of design, craftsmanship, fashion, and you support them to strengthen their brands and ultimately have cultural and economic influence on the global stage. So I think it would be really interesting to understand more of your experience and what you're seeing also through your work on the continent.
Sure. I don't know how to, okay.
Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you very much to the association, African Association of the Graduate Institute, for having us. I think what you're doing is very interesting, especially when we look at the program of today. The morning started with colonial legacy. Then the conversation switched to democracy and Pan-Africanism. And I know most of the time culture always come at the end. But I always feel like culture should be the beginning. But having culture as a conversation is critical. And the topic that you've chosen to give us the platform to speak is also very interesting from the perspective that you see culture as being in motion, not being static. So being reclaimed, being reinvented, and being also contemporary somehow, because the culture of centuries before colonialism in Africa is definitely not the culture after colonialism, and definitely not the same as culture today when we talk about Africans. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context to what I do and how I came to be doing that. I think like most young Africans, I was born and raised in Africa, so I grew up in Africa. And when I traveled to come to Europe, the goal wasn't really my goal, it was my parents' goal, was to, do something that gives you independence and life in general. The goals of our parents is never about you being happy, you being aligned, or you doing something that, matches your own understanding of the world and how you see yourself in the world. So coming to France, I arrived in France. So I was I studied international trade, not politics, but I was very passionate about politics. But I said, trade is better because it's more practical, it's less, we're talking, but we know what politicians are, But at the end of the day, it seems like even today, economies still lead the conversation in politics. So I'm not trying to challenge you, all students studying politics, but my parents pushed me toward more, practical things, as they said at the time. So I studied international trade, but in the meantime, I've always been passionate about culture. So the way I saw culture in France was very different, because the way France tells the story of culture is really ingrained into creating value. When you visit a museum, you pay for the entrance. And at the end of the visit of the museum, you buy something. So they're not only telling you about a story just for the sake of telling you about a story, they're trying to sell who they are at the end of the day. So first, by visiting museums, going to art galleries, and visiting Paris. I mean, when you live in Paris, everywhere is a storefront. So everywhere is displaying something that you will either buy or be part of or challenge your thinking or whatever. So I was very attracted by the world of luxury, not for the glitz and glamour, but really for the heritage part of it, because there's a big heritage part in the luxury industry when you look at the big houses and how they tell their stories, how they anchor who they are into tradition, like, you know, telling old stories of royalties in their own version. So all of this brought me to then, after studies, work for a Swiss corporation. Very interesting, now that I live in Switzerland, because I was living in France at the time. And my work was really in the travel retail environment, a lot about global marketing. So I was traveling all across Europe to sell watches and jewelry. So I wasn't changing the world somehow. And I felt very frustrated because I felt like, at the end of the day, what's the point of selling watches and jewelry? Okay, this is not your father company anyway. So what are you going to change here? And as was I like, after 5 years of being maybe burnout somehow, but at the crossroad of who am I? How am I changing the world? How am I contributing as an African? Am I giving back? You know, I was in that period. And then I said, okay, you know what, do something concrete. And then I left my job and I started doing, it was fun, but as a business person, I still wanted to mix like passion and fashion and business. So I started organizing pop-up store in Paris. So I was traveling the continent, bringing pieces and showing the pieces to the people in Paris. So after a few editions of this, making a little bit of money, but not that much, I felt like, okay, how can we go to the next level of this? Then I opened a gallery in Paris, and the vision of the gallery was very much to be curious, but be actively curious and share the curiosity with the other people in the space that I knew, which is brands, creativity, design. So I started curating beautiful things that I was seeing across the continent and also in the diaspora, and I was sharing that conversation with platform and at the same time as I was selling the product. So doing that after many years, I started becoming like a reference. So people will come to me and say, oh, what do you think of this? Can you help us sell it in France? Can you help us tell a narrative behind it? And my perception and my entry to that space was never about the folklore of Africa, but really like the side of Africa that we usually do not see. Because when you travel, let's say, if you travel to Ghana and you don't stay in Accra and you go to Bolgatanga, then you see different kind of things. You don't only see your typical Ghanaian or a lot of wax print. You see, for instance, weaver in Bolgatanga doing very, very delicate, intricate, detailed weaving that's very sophisticated. So that was the part that I was interested by. Also maybe because my mindset was already shifted somehow by the luxury houses. So I was always looking for an element of exception, an element of scarcity, and an element of emotion that I haven't felt yet in my curation. So doing that brought me to be able to collaborate with a lot of institutions in France, promoting art from different perspectives, organizing auctions to sell very exquisite pieces, working with major platforms like the Grand Palais for exhibition as well, or organizing exhibition across Europe. So at the end of the day, I was doing exactly almost the same thing that I was doing before for a corporation, but at this time it was more fun because then I would like choose the things that I liked and the conversation would look like what I wanted as well. And evolving as well, like this late years, the idea has been like, okay, when you think about creativity, when you think about made in Africa, the perspective or the angle is always like, it seems like it's one thing. You know, when you say Africa, it seems to be a monolithic, something that is cast in stone, that they all are the same, they all look the same, they do the same thing, or they express themselves the same way. And that's something that I've seen in the fashion world before this generation or this decade. It was like being more precise. If you go to a community like Fumban, for example, it's in Cameroon, where they do bronze casting, they do wood carving, they also do pearl embroideries. What does their creativity look like? Does it look like if you go to Ethiopia, or does it look like if you go to South Africa and you meet the Zulu, how they're weaving? Is it the same? It's definitely not the same. So this last year, my work has been really around how do we give the possibility to those communities and territories of craft people to express themselves in conjunction with what contemporary means, you know? And for example, what you're seeing here is a collaboration between a Malian designer called Sheikh Diallo and a community of 40 craft people in Fumban. You might say this is not in Cameroon, this is not in Fumban, but this is in Cameroon and this is in Fumban. And this is made by artisans. So it doesn't look like what you would typically see in Quai Branly or what you would typically see in museums, because today it's no longer about those things that were created centuries ago. We are allowed as African creatives or a Fumbanese creative or as a Malian designer to create what resonates with our way of seeing things. And that's a little bit of an interpretation of that. During my journey working for international corporation or working with African designer, there's been a set of things that are always the same. First of all, when something is very beautiful, you remember it. So it's memorable. When you see it once, you remember it. Next time you see it, it looks like that thing you saw last time. And the second element that is very consistent in global brands or global things that are very delicately made, and that's why you can say porcelain de Limoges is different than porcelain that they do in Shenzhen in China, for example, because their aesthetic is different. And if you look also at the people who are telling that story, the emotion that they're sharing with you, you're feeling something. And that is true for made in Africa as it is true for made in elsewhere. I'm not talking about industry per se, because when I talk about maybe technological things, but still, if you look at Apple and Samsung, you look at these three things, it's definitely different. Both of them are expressing things different way. So I really focus the work that I do around the creative industry from a perspective of, if we go to Africa and we're looking about those creative people, can we find an element of exception, things, whatever is exceptional, and can we convert that conversation around craftsmanship to be about the quest of excellence? Because I think in many brains, if you say luxury in Africa, it doesn't resonate, or if you say excellence in Africa, it doesn't resonate, because we're not used to it as being part of the narrative in the creative space as well. But the big part of my work has been about that, to say, okay, can we shift the narrative here and stop saying that if something is made in a small village somewhere, it's probably poorly made? Well, if we say that, where is Audemars Piguet made? Isn't it in a small village in Switzerland? By the way, where are Hermes bags made? Isn't it in a small village in France? That connotation of what is a village, when it comes to Africa, is different. When it's Europe, village is different. So, and what I'm trying to do in my work is say, okay, as a creative person, if you're in the quest of excellence, if you're trying to create something that is memorable, exceptional, and create emotion, you can create it everywhere in the world. And you can create it in Africa. So that's what the journey has really been about. So I'm just going to share a few exceptional things that I've seen. Maybe your mind wouldn't be like, oh, these are not African things. They are made in Africa. Outlander, for instance, is made in Cape Town in South Africa. This is made in Senegal. Aïssa Dion, weaving. This is also South Africa. Sisifo Poswa is an amazing ceramicist. She works on volumes and shapes, and her reinterpretation of creativity is something quite striking and amazing. I will invite you to definitely enter her world and discover what she creates. If you look at that notion as well, to say culture, what is culture? Culture is, of course, identities, expressions, And I like the way the French say it, is art de vivre. So it's a way of living. So maybe as a Yoruba from Nigeria, what is the exceptional thing about Yoruba that you don't find elsewhere that could become a label from the Yoruba people? Definitely the adire. The way the adire is made in the Yoruba culture is definitely different of the way the indigo is used in Cameroon on the Ndap, or the way it is used in Benin on the fabric that they have. So if you go to Morocco as well, the way they recreate, and this I'm talking about young brands, these are young brands, they are decade old, they are tapping into heritage and craftsmanship to tell a new narrative of made in Africa, a new narrative of legacy in motion, a new narrative of culture and people in motion. So it's no longer maybe the perception that you might have of what is made in Africa. There's this zine from Morocco. You could say it could be from anywhere else, but if you know a little bit about our culture, you see the details. This is the Bolgatanga weaving that I was telling you about earlier. And Akosua, she's been at the forefront of that, working with this women weaver, doing intricate patterns, very vibrant colors, and taking it to the world, because the collaboration she's had a lot of collaboration. And in terms of distribution, I think a few years ago, she was distributed at Globus here in Switzerland. And as it was sitting on the stand of Globus, it could be like something made in Italy, but it was made in Ghana. And she shipped, like, if you order on her website today, in 48 hours, you have it everywhere in the world. So the chance that I've had is really to come across a lot of creative things at the African level. And you will see, if you realize by the end of this, you won't see wax print anywhere. But this is just a personal challenge, and a personal challenge to you as well. Like when I talk about Africa, creativity, and fabric, you won't see the wax print. That has become the identity of Africa. So if you go to Senegal, for instance, the Manjak weaving, this is what the Manjak weaving looks like. But this is what the Manjak weaving has become under the hand of Aïssa Diane. So she didn't only took it and copy and pasted, but she added an element of, maybe you can call it refinement, call it what you want. I think it's a matter of taste, but taking it to another level, that give another interpretation and maybe another aesthetic to something that is made there. And the craftsmanship integration framework that she's using is very much industrial. There's no word for it in English, but in French, we have two words. We actually have three when we talk about handmade. We start by artisanat, so it's handmade. But then when we want to talk about volume, we don't talk about industry, we talk about manufacture. And I don't know the word for in English for that. So a big house like Hermes, they sell thousands of bags per year, but they still have the status of an artisanal, a compagnie artisanale. A big brand like Audemars Piguet, they do thousands of watches, but they still have the artisanal. So it's industry somehow, but it's still artisanal. And how do you bring it to the global stage? This is a restaurant in London, very well known, The Sketch in London. A few years ago, it was revamped, and it was revamped. All the upholstery that you're seeing is made in Senegal. So I'm just trying to invite you through what I've shown you to see that creativity in Africa today is on the way of becoming a powerhouse and be part of the living. Because most of the time, the way we look at culture, we look at cultural elements or cultural things as things that are sitting in museums. But the way I look at it and the way the community of people I work with look at it is really as a way of living. So how do we make sure that what we're creating, what we represent, the identity we want to be or we want to represent is part of daily life, and also is used as a vehicle to tell our identities, our taste, our willingness to be part of a world from a certain perspective. And that is also culture. And I think it's is important when we're discussing those narrative in motion and how the things are evolving. We also see it from that perspective and really like take it into consideration that the $15 billion that are being made today in music, in films, in fashion, and creating 20 million jobs across Africa is also culture. And not look at culture just from the perspective of, it's fun for museum, it's good for museum, or it's good for entertainment only. But when we are living the way we are living at home, we rather import things. So that's why I really like that the days today started by colonial legacy. And also that you talked about democracies. And at some point I was discussing ideologies with some participants because I'm like, okay, if we want to have a policy of governance, of democracy, Pan-Africanism as we see it, doesn't it start with ideology? And is ideology possible if we don't have identities? And those identities, how do we express them? How are we culturally aware of who we are and how do we express it in the world far away from the culture and get the other people around the world to adopt it? So maybe that's, yeah, a big question for all of us.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you.
There was a full lecture within our discussion. So thank you so much, Nelly, for sharing. And I'm sure it's sparking lots of questions from the audience. So precisely to leave some time for your questions and our discussion with you, let me turn to Bansoa, who would, I'm sure, sort of bounce back on all of the insights that we've heard now. Bansoa, I mean, from your experience as a curator, working also in museums, at the intersection of different disciplines, we wanted to ask you, what's the role of the African artist in transforming the narratives about Africa and decolonizing representations? I know that that's an area that is part of your research, and we wanted to hear you on that. Yeah, it's a big subject.
Wow, no, and I'm just wowed by both of your presentations, and the work that you're doing is very, very inspiring, and I'm looking forward to discussing more. I also wanted to thank you so much, Charlotte, for your invitation, and thank you to the Association ASA for putting all this together. And if I go back to my, way back university years when I was myself on the ASA, and we were trying to also do our thing, but this level, wow, guys, this is great. So thank you so much. Around the role of the artists, so I think what was also important that we saw in your presentations, the three of you, was that when we say art, we have an imaginary that comes with it. And so we talked about visual arts and around performance, dance, and craftsmanship as well. My experience is initially in museums, in museology, in ethnographic museums, because this is where traditional African art really is. And we started the day with talking about colonial legacies, and maybe I'm just gonna go a little bit back in time in terms of art as a field regarding Africa and the colonial legacy of it, and why now what is in motion now is also reconciling the art as a field with the society. And because most of the visual arts of that are like in ethnographic museums, for instance, were central part of the societies within which they were taken. So they weren't separate, and they were the visual part of it was linked to the part in motion, was linked to the dynamism, was linked to community building, to community healing, to getting together. And that's where different people in the community had a role to play for the ecosystem to work. So the artists had a role to play even back then, even when we say it's not art. There's an artistic component, aesthetic component to it as well. But then there's the healers had a role to play. The specific knowledge holders, specific priests. And so this ecosystem, that's what was also dislocated in the process of the colonial legacy. So now we are also left with different fragments, societal fragments. And when we talk about art in general, there's a need to reconcile those different facets of society. To go to your question around the role of the artists, since I've been working more with visual artists, what I would say is that what we're seeing now in the contemporary scene is that a lot of the artists are showcasing the diversity of what the African experience can be. And you were telling us about how, you know, you might be, stakeholders might be pushing you in one direction. And so the market itself is also driving what the artist can or can't do. And so there's sometimes also a conflict in what the artists want to be presenting and representing of their diversity and what is being, you know, expected of them in terms of what they display. For me, you both said that you came here, you know, to study. I'm from the diaspora, so grew up here and was born here. And I think the art itself is also a connector and has a way to, you know, link us to our roots. And not just to our roots to a place, but to our African roots that are actually so widespread and that are not just linked in the continent, but that are diasporic, and that a lot of Africans or Afro-diasporic people see themselves in the work of artists that have African heritage. So that's why the artist's role is so important, actually.
Thank you so much. So, Banso, of course, there is this very difficult question. I mean, it's not a difficult question, but it's a very broad question about, and we spoke about that earlier, about who is telling the African stories today. So we have seen that there is definitely a shift, and that, I mean, what we heard from you and what we see from visual artists is that Now artists are just, setting the stage and framing the narratives and just speaking for themselves, which was not so evident before. But on that, of course, there are all the issues around appropriation, about the question of authenticity, of tradition and contemporary. I wanted to hear you a little bit about this, and I see that Nelly is nodding, and I'm sure all of you may contribute to these questions as well.
I'm thinking the art world is, there are different sectors and there are different ecosystems. And in terms of, framing the narrative, there is a bit more space now in the sense that in the last, I think, 10 years, as Philibert, you were also saying, there has been a global push to more representativity, more inclusion, and this comes with the transformation of societies. It's just reflective of who are the people in different positions that have the possibility to act, and in what direction they can do it. And in terms of appropriation, maybe can you give me a more specific question? Is it appropriation of their work, or?
Yeah, about, the cultural appropriation of certain narratives and sort of playing with what appropriation could have been, in the past of African identity or African cultures. Sort of there is reappropriation as well of reclaiming the narratives, and many artists are sort of visual artists, at least, are playing with this, like sort of showing that the traditions from Africa, or the traditional African art has been appropriated by Cubism, and we know all these stories, right?
Okay, yeah.
But actually now it's maybe the other way around, right? That the contemporary creation from Africa is sort of maybe reappropriated by the Western world as well. It's in two ways. Does it make sense?
When I'm thinking about appropriation and how, in the early 20th century, African aesthetics have revolutionized the way visual artists started painting. They started new movement. It opened up a new realm of creativity. I'm thinking today a lot of African artists that are using the same aesthetic inspiration and work in their visual art are reclaiming this part of their identity and reclaiming it as a way to connect, the past and the present. And also the future, of course, because we see a lot of Afrofuturistic work utilizing ancient pieces, masks, sculptures, ancient iconography to think of how do we propel ourselves in the future. So I think the artists as well, to go back to the role of the artists, they are also helping us just open up to new realms of possibility. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think now, thank you all of you. Great insights. And now I think we would like to hear from you in the room, your comments, reactions, questions to our panelists.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, panelists. I'm Kawa here, alumni anthropology and sociology from Graduate Institute. I think a good example I'll give of cultural appropriation was the song Shakira made, Waka Waka. Quite interesting. It's Time for Africa, and she sang it in Africa. It's a song from 1986, the Golden Sound Boys of Cameroon.
Yeah.
And I think they've made a settlement. I just want to hinge on the cultural appropriation part because this is very fascinating. I didn't know that Africa have gone this far with moving a lot of the creativity around the world. My own question to the panelists, including both the brand strategist and the artist here in the house, is how did we actually move from cultural appropriation to where we are today? Because a part of cultural appropriation, the benefit, it was exploitation. It was exploitation of talent, and the dues was not paid back to those. And this is happening in other sectors to date. But I'm still kind of, I'm putting the question there to know whether the dues are paid back to those that are putting the actual hard work in all of this, because this is very fascinating. What you showed from Charlotte, the moderator, moving from traditional mix of contemporary, then the work Fribert is doing in Africa, and there's a push of the young people to support most of this trend. I know there's a bit of Afrobeat that have supported this trend. So basically, the exploitation or appropriation wouldn't come from there, but mostly would be from the artwork and the designs, because we've seen brands done this before, and they've still not acknowledged where the origin is from. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe because, yeah, we can take maybe a second question, then I will also translate the questions for Philibert, so he can also react to it.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have a question for Nelly Wanji, I think is you, yeah, because you talked about the luxury industry, okay, and I was very surprised to see the picture of it was Fumban in Cameroon. Yeah, so I was.
Are you from Fumban?
From the western region, yeah, but not from Fumban specifically. What I not notice in terms of problem for the luxury industry in Africa in general is the fact that as you said, we don't have much problem to produce luxury. I mean, in terms of in a manufactural perspective, it's something that we can do. But to me, the problem is about the infrastructure of the experience of the luxury, because the rules of the success for the European industries in luxuries, it's also linked by the fact that when you go to Paris, you got the Haussmannian architecture, you know. In London, it's pretty much the same. So people, when they come to Europe, it's a whole infrastructure in terms of luxury. So the problem with Africa is the fact that in terms of marketing, when you go to Douala, if we take the example of Cameroon, even if Fumban or another region, Cameroon, produce one day a huge quality in terms of luxury products, the experience of shopping will not match, because when you come to Douala, even if you build the best shop to shopping, the whole area have to fit with the narrative. The whole street got to fit with the narrative, and consequently, if I take a country like I don't know, Morocco is way more positioned about it, because they understood how to market their general identity. They're upgrading their visual language, their architecture, and maybe another country, I don't know, in Africa, but
South Africa.
yeah, South Africa, yeah. South Africa as well. Ethiopia start to produce also good general visual narrative about it. But for the other countries, I'm afraid to say that even if they produce a huge quality of luxury products, if the infrastructure and the visual general narrative of the country doesn't upgrade, it won't be marketable for the rest of the world. What are you thinking about this, Ms. McKinch?
Happy to respond.
Nelly, maybe you want to start,
Okay.
and I've translated the first question for Philibert here, if you want. Si tu veux réagir à cette question après, la première question qui s'adressait aussi à toi.
I'm going to start by the last question, but I'm going to anchor on the first one about appropriation. Your question about luxury being more about the experience than the craft itself, I totally understand it. And that if you're creating luxury, but you can't create an experience around it, it's not experience as luxury, because luxury is all about experience. The big part of it is about experience. But I think what I want to focus on is the value creation process. I totally agree with you. I mean, if you look at most African countries, the perception of luxury as we have experienced it elsewhere is not necessarily there. But in the meantime, I also want to bring a challenge to the table. You're living in Switzerland, so if you ever had the experience, if you go to Gstaad, maybe not to stay, but I don't know if it's open to public, go to the Swiss Chalet. There's a Swiss Chalet that was created by Naxan Mimrang. He's a proeminent entrepreneur from Switzerland, but with a lot of entanglement with Africa. So he's very passionate about collecting a lot of great things from the African continent. So the Swiss Chalet was designed by Francis Kéré, who is an architect from Burkina Faso. And a lot of things within that space come from Africa. So what I'm trying to say is that it is possible to create a luxury experience with a lot of things that are made in Africa, even if the surrounding of a lot of cities in Africa doesn't reflect what you could have as an experience in Paris with the faubourg and the avenues and the Haussmannian buildings. But in the meantime, I want us to decolonize our mindset of what luxury is. Because maybe for what I would call a mass market consumer, luxury is shiny, is Louis Vuitton on Georges V. But for people who have already experienced it, luxury, and I actually say that because I had consumers and customers coming from those big houses, working in those big houses, and luxury for them was going to a small village and experience something different. So I think there's several levels of what luxury could be, but if we see it as a mass market product, yes, we have to build those experiences around it. And if you go to Cameroon, if you go to Kaji Hotel, Loka, they're trying to create that. And now if you go to countries like Benin, let's take West Africa, you also have hotels that are trying to create that environment of what African identities are and what the luxury experience is, and blending both to create something that is unique. And that does not necessarily look like a Shangri-La in Paris or, I don't know, how do you call it? Beautiful hotel like Continental here. It's not the same experience because they're not selling the same story. And I think what I want to insist on is what is the story that we are telling? What is the identity that we are putting on top of the experience? Are we mimicking what it means luxury from a global perspective? Or are we creating an identity of luxury that represents the culture? And that's where I think the possibilities are extraordinary. Because when you come then to appropriation and you look at what Louis Vuitton will do, they will take the Kente from Ghana and they will have Virgil Abloh do something that you will call luxury because it's being presented by Louis Vuitton. And that's the challenge. And the challenge that we have today regarding appropriation is that culture, the way we are creating culture, we are not creating structures around culture. And the challenge is that if you don't have ownership, you don't have the IP. If you don't have the IP, you don't have the cash. As simple as that. Because it's the person who has the IP who makes the money the most. You as a creative person, and you could look at models like Zara, the creative people who copy and paste at Zara, they don't make as much money as the person who has the industrial machinery to go to market. So today in Africa, culture is still culture, but the capital on culture to make distribution possible is not happening. And that's why we have to rethink our ideology of how do we want to exist in this world? Because if we want to exist by wearing wax print made by Holland, where they have the intellectual property of our grandmothers, because that's the thing, is that the fabric we created by the grandmothers, but they don't own the intellectual property, so they can't reproduce it and make money out of it. So appropriation is a big part of it is because of that, is that we don't have structures, we don't have capital, and we don't own the distribution. And it's true for movies. A lot of Nigerian movies that I see today, I see on Netflix. So who is making the most money on top of those productions from Nigeria? Probably not the producer. So I don't know if it answers your question, but that's the experience that I'm having today in that space.
Merci Nelly. Peut-être Philibert.
Alors, moi, je vais essayer. Est-ce que j'arrive à te lire? Question sur l'appropriation culturelle, le design et
Esthétique.
esthétique.
Les formes culturelles.
Ok, les formes culturelles africaines aussi.
Hybridation avec des formes culturelles occidentales.
Ok. Cette question d'appropriation culturelle est très, très complexe. Est très complexe sur plusieurs niveaux. Et je ne suis pas sûr que j'ai les informations pour vous répondre. Parce que si tout se met d'accord que le berceau de l'humanité, c'est l'Afrique, si on est tous d'accord que l'Afrique est le berceau de l'humanité, ça veut dire que toutes les créations, formes du monde viennent de l'Afrique. Vous voyez ce que je veux dire? Donc, c'est très difficile pour moi de répondre à cette question en tant qu'artiste, mais je sais que au niveau de la structuration mondiale, les pays développés ont pris de l'avance sur l'Afrique, au niveau de la structuration, au niveau de politique sociale. Ça fait que l'Afrique a voulu copier les Occidentaux par rapport à la structuration. Je ne parle pas de la culture. Donc, c'est une question très, très délicate, à mon avis. Par rapport aux jeunes, ce que je pourrais dire, une tendance artistique aujourd'hui, l'Afrique arrive facilement à consommer l'art populaire. L'art populaire qui est facilement incarné par la population. Je prends l'exemple sur le coupé-décalé. Le coupé-décalé a été créé en 99, 98, si je ne me trompe pas. Vous voyez, en 20 ans, le coupé-décalé a eu sa force depuis l'Afrique, en Côte d'Ivoire. Ensuite, les Nigérians ont copié coupé-décalé et tout d'un coup, les Nigériens même ont dépassé la Côte d'Ivoire avec le style américain, le style anglais. Vous voyez, donc, au niveau des formes esthétiques en Afrique, le mouvement populaire a pris le dessus. Et ça, c'est formidable. Parce que cette forme est consommée déjà même en Afrique. Je parle de une certaine musique, hein, mais certaines formes sont difficilement consommables en Afrique. Par exemple, quand on parle de la création artistique contemporaine, nous autres chorégraphes, on est obligés de passer par l'Institut français ou Goethe Institut allemand pour pouvoir avoir des moyens pour créer dans les bonnes conditions artistiques. Vous voyez ce que je veux dire? Donc, c'est très compliqué de généraliser. Donc, j'ai pris une notion pour pouvoir répondre à une question. Et je vous assure que cette question appropriation culturelle, ça trotte dans ma tête depuis très longtemps. Comment aborder ça? Et on est dans un pays, on est dans un monde globalisé. Comment on peut enlever l'Afrique dans tous ces lots-là? Et en même temps, on sait que l'histoire nous a raconté que les pays coloniaux, les pays développés ont pillé l'Afrique de ses ressources. Donc, c'est difficile à parler de ça, de mon point de vue.
So initially, Philibert said it was very difficult to answer this question, but actually he answered it very intelligently. So I'm going to try to translate what he tried to say. So he said that this question of the cultural appropriation is pretty complex, and that in principle, if we agree that Africa is the cradle of humanity, then all creations come from Africa. So that should be fairly simple. But what he's saying is that at the level of the structures, the infrastructures, the policies, we have discussed this, Africa is lagging behind and the Western world has rather been at the forefront. And somehow this has led Africa to be willing to copy the Western world in the world of art. He took an example around popular culture and what young people are actually, taking on and consuming as popular culture. And he took the example of coupé décalé, this dance that comes from Côte d'Ivoire, which was created in the late 90s. And he said in 20 years, this dance has been evolving very fast because from Côte d'Ivoire, he went to Nigeria and he's been really powered by the Nigerians who actually went beyond and created another form that went beyond and actually spread to the US and to all the English-speaking world. And he said that this popular culture has gone beyond Africa, but is also consumed in Africa, which is great. And that's an interesting example he wanted to put forward. And then he mentioned that this question he's been trying to grapple with this question for many, many years, this question of cultural appropriation and what it means for him. As a dancer and choreographer in Africa, what he sees is that somehow you still need to go through foreign cultural institutes such as Institut Français or Goethe Institute if you want to create new cultural forms. And that's, of course, a barrier. So this was his reflections, which I think are quite interesting. If there is no more question.
Yes, I believe, although we would all love to hear much more from our amazing panelists, unless someone has a question for Ms. Bansoa, I believe we have to move to closing remarks.
Yes. Thank you very much. I also wanted to thank the team for the invitation and the panel for accepting to speak, and to all of you for being with us for an exciting discussion. I think has been very stimulating. So thank you so much and bravo.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for taking the time to come today, as well as to all the panelists for such an engaging and insightful discussion on a topic that we don't always get to explore at the Institute, but I think that cultural expression is something that we should all think about more deeply. Unfortunately, it is now time for the final part of our program, the closing remarks. It is my pleasure to invite to the stage Malak Afifi, our Summit co-lead, and Jennifer Xiao, our ASA co-director.
Thank you so much, Samira. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Merci à tous ceux qui sont encore avec nous dans la salle après cette journée assez chargée, mais surtout très riche en débats. Je vais dès à présent remercier toutes les personnes qui se sont investies dans la réalisation de cet événement. D'abord, merci à l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie pour sa généreuse contribution et son parrainage lors de ce sommet. Et bien évidemment à Hamada pour nous avoir offert des délicieuses boissons de bissap, hibiscus. Merci aussi à nos formidables intervenants, modérateurs et animateurs. Je tiens également à remercier chacun et chacune des bénévoles qui ont rendu la conférence possible. Donc, lorsque j'appellerai votre nom, veuillez lever la main ou vous lever, juste pour qu'on puisse vous remercier proprement. Donc, je tiens à remercier Lou Rinaldo, Malak Hilal, Joanne Carla Cheto Tate, Louise Baudian, Hyunji Chang, Alexis Akodjenou, Ezra El Fadil, Khadija Harris Mohamed, Samira Ibrahim Faria, Tinsay Abio et Shadrash Kundi. So thank you all, truly. Enfin, merci à ma co-organisatrice Karis ainsi qu'aux co-directrices de l'association Africa Student Association, Jennifer and Hadi, of course. On travaille depuis octobre dernier pour organiser tout ça. Donc, je suis très fière d'avoir pu travailler avec toutes les trois à leur côté. Finally, I want to take this opportunity to just reflect on everything that was discussed today. Namely, in organizing this year's summit, we really believed in the importance of creating a platform and a space to discuss current issues on the African continent. It's always relevant to talk about, to be optimistic about the future and to talk about the past and to connect it to today. But our primary focus was truly to be able to discuss timely issues. And yeah, I'm just really glad to have seen such success throughout the day, to have seen such engaging conversation, to have received such positive feedback from everybody. And I really do hope that everyone here today, whether you only came to this panel or you came to all three panels, that everyone was able to learn, engage, take something away from this conference. And I really do hope that everybody leaves from today feeling a renewed sense of engagement. And yeah, thank you so much. I think I'm just going to hand it off to Jennifer to close us off for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Malak, and good afternoon or evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. My name is Jennifer Siav. I'm ASA co-director, and I'm Ghanaian, and it's an honor for me to close this session with you guys. We have reached the end of this day, and what a day it has been. Behind these hours, we've had a lot of work, from late night texts, long email threads, voice notes, and endless calls, and all the work that happens behind the scenes that made it possible today. So before anything else, I also want to acknowledge the incredible team that was behind today's success. To our incredible summit task force, like I like to call it, from contacting the speakers to finding the entertainment, managing the budget, and yes, relentlessly harassing all of you on social media. This event would have not been made possible without you. To our summit colleagues, Malak and Karis, who is not here to hear this, thank you for your hard work, your patience, and for making today not just possible, but an amazing success. To our speakers who would not only share their expertise, but generally listen to our input, and to our sponsors, Hamada Drinks and the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, to the musician, the Galerie Boulard exhibition, the catering team, thank you all. And to each one of you in this room today, thank you for showing up, engaging, and being ready to learn. Today, we were asked to anchor Africa to the present, to stand at the intersection of vision and momentum, and I think we did exactly that. I will start with the last panel because I also agree that art and culture should always come first. We heard that craft and creation are not relics sitting in museums. They are vehicles for telling our identities, our taste, our willingness, and our stories. Our panelists showed us that African creativity is not waiting to be discovered. It's already out there, and it's already reshaping global contemporary art, luxury, and identity, one story at a time. And for those of us in diaspora, art is indeed a thread, one that connects us to our roots, however widespread and scattered they might be. Our workshop on democracy asked a question that too rarely gets asked in rooms like this. We didn't ask whether Africa needed democracy, but we asked what an authentic African democracy would look like. And drawing from pre-colonial governance tradition and the wisdom in this room today, students imagine frameworks that are participatory, grounded, and free from colonial transplants, because this continent's youngest generation deserve institutions built for them and not inherited from others. And our first panel challenged us to look at Sudan with clear eyes, to reject the lazy narrative of yet another civil war, and to understand that this is a war on civilians that demand our attention. We centered the agency of Sudanese people in finding their own solutions. It was a conversation that set the tone for everything that followed today. These were not just merely conversations, they were necessary ones, because speaking about Africa with clarity and nuance, but also with feelings and emotions, and above all, without waiting for permission, is itself an act of presence, and I would add, of resistance. Especially in academic space like this one, it is an act of reclaiming our own narrative. I joined ASA in my first year because I wanted a place where I belonged. The fact that I'm standing here today in my second year means that I maybe found it. And every event, every year, the student of ASA builds something that became more and more real. For many of us, ASA is home, a safe space for students who arrive from all over the world to Geneva and need to find themselves and reflected somewhere. We carry forward an initiative that is more than events on a calendar. It is about belonging. From timely conversation about Pan-Africanism to game nights where we can simply let loose, to new movie nights that bring back dynamics from home and give us space to talk about them together. We are creating a place where students can be challenged academically, but also just be themselves. But ASA has never existed in isolation, so I want to add all the initiatives that we have been collaborating throughout the years. We exist within an interconnected web of sister initiatives, and we believe in solidarity. Not just standing along each other, but truly building together, because we know that the issues that affect our communities do not exist in solace, and neither should we. With MENA, the Middle East and North African Initiative, we stood in support during their conference on Palestine, because bearing witness to injustice wherever it happens is never optional. And as we discussed today as well in our panel on Sudan, these are not distant crises. They are present, they are urgent, and they demand that we show up. We also share the iftars together in the spirit of Ramadan, because solidarity is also about showing up in joy, not only in struggle. With FemCall, the Feminist Collective, we joined Rage, Care and Action, contributing to a panel on health and medical neglect, an issue that cuts across marginalized communities, including African and Afro-descendant women. Because when we talk about the future Africa, we cannot leave the bodies and experiences of African women out of the conversation. With KISA, the Queer International Student Assembly, we gather around poetry, because sometimes truth speaks better in verse. And as today's panel on narrative and now reminded us, the stories we tell about Africa and the forms we choose to tell them in are themselves a form of power. Not every act of resistance looks like a policy paper. Sometimes it looks like a room full of people listening, really listening to each other. Before I close, I also want to thank a few people. To our ASA board, Karis Tinsai, Alexi, Khadija, Suban, Debo, and Eugenia, who helped lay the foundation for what we are today. Thank you for showing up every time. To the previous ASA board, and in particular to Amen and Maya, thank you for trusting us in our capacity to, in trusting us with something as important and as delicate as ASA. And to Hadi, my co-director, and someone I am proud to call my friend, thank you for believing in our capacity to lead ASA together. This moment is as mine as much as it's yours. Vision without momentum is just a dream. Momentum without vision is just noise. What we are building slowly, collective, and I will also add stubbornly, is both a vision of an African presence at these institutions, but also outside, that is grounded, collaborative, and unafraid to take up space. And the momentum to keep moving, event after event, year after year, summit after summit. So to everyone here today, carry this energy with you into your research, your conversation, your careers. And to all students especially, I hope to remind you that we are not just students, we are experts in the making. Africa has indeed the youngest population in the world, and this is not a footnote, this is a force. So let us stop waiting for a seat at the table. Let's pull up a chair, sit down, and stay there until to listen to us. Africa does not need to be explained or defended. It needs to be centered. And as the great Pan-African Kwame Nkrumah said, and I said it with a great pride as a fellow Ghanaian, I am not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. I hope that Africa already lives in each one of you guys. And if today planted that seed, then we have done our job, because that work, our work, starts here and it starts now. And so, in the spirit of Nkrumah's word, I will let the Africa that was born in me have the last word. Inga, my mother tongue from Ghana. Nyefe, Nyeradon. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Malak and Jennifer, for closing this summit so beautifully with such a positive tone. So as we close Africa Summit 2026, I want to take a moment to return to our theme, anchoring Africa in the present, where vision meets momentum. Today has shown us exactly what that means. We have explored critical questions around governance, representation, and challenge narrative. And we have also placed Africa within cultural expression beyond dominant narratives. So before we conclude, I would like to extend sincere thanks to all of those who made this event possible, the organizing team, as well as our sponsor, Hamada and Gallery Brohart. And of course, to all of you guests, thank you for your presence, your engagement, your energy all throughout the day. So as we leave today, we hope that you carry forward that momentum, and that in your work, in your thinking, in the different spaces you move through, that all the ideas that were shared here, the connection you've made, and the perspective that you've heard do not end in this room. We hope that the discussion continues to grow and that it is translated into action. So thank you for being a part of this. It was my honor to be your co-host today, and I think I can now declare Africa Summit 2026 closed.
Charlotte, est-ce qu'on a parlé de l'art, de la musique, de la danse, mais c'est resté dans la tête. Est-ce qu'on ne va pas essayer quelque chose? Alors, on va essayer quelque chose. Regardez, on va essayer quelque chose. On va parler du lien entre tous les êtres, le souffle et le sang qui nous lie. Vous allez juste simplement essayer. Après moi, vous essayez, on va voir. Kanuya o kadi, kanuya o kadi. Kanuya o kadi, kanuya o kadi. Kanuya o kadi, jamana flache. Kanuya o kadi, jamana flache. Kanuya o kadi, muso flache. Kanuya o kadi, muso flache. Kanuya o kadi, kanuya o kadi. Kanuya o kadi, kanuya o kadi. Nebibo Burkina, kanuya o kadi. Nebibo
Cameroun,
Ali Bibo, Cameroun, Kanuya, Okadi.
Ali Bibo, Burkina, Cameroun.
Ali Bibo, Cameroun, Kanuya, Okadi.
Ali Bibo, Cameroun, Okadi.
Et Bibo, France, Suisse, Kanuya, Okadi.
Et Bibo, Francis, Cameroun, Okadi.
Tout simplement, la fraternité entre nous, c'est l'essence même de la vie. C'est ça, le Kanou. En Bambara, Kanuyao Kadi, ça veut dire l'amour entre les peuples, entre les êtres. Il fallait qu'on chante avant de partir.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.